This is a continuation of Chapter 2 on the chemistry of life, and this is Part 2C. And in this part, we're going to be discussing the properties of water and also talking about pH. So you might not realize it, but the fact that ice cubes float in a glass of water is actually somewhat unusual. What that means is that ice cubes are less dense than liquid water, and that's typically not the case with other types of materials. So we're going to spend some time talking about properties of water, okay? And the importance of water in living systems and why water is special. So why is water so suitable for life? The structure of water gives it very unique properties, and we started discussing this in the last lecture when we started to talk about polar covalent bonds and hydrogen bonding. So remember that within a water molecule, the oxygen-hydrogen bonds are covalent bonds, and more specifically, they are polar covalent bonds. And water is a polar molecule, and that means that there is an area of the water molecule that is negatively charged and an area that is positively charged. So the polar nature of water means that water forms hydrogen bonds. And so water molecules form this network of hydrogen bonds. And you can see that here. So for example, here is pointing to the hydrogen bond. Here is one water molecule here, one water molecule here, and once again, the negative, slight negative charge on the oxygen and the slight positive charge on the hydrogen makes it so that there is this attraction between these two water molecules, and that attraction is known as a hydrogen bond. Now, in liquid water, hydrogen bonds constantly break and reform. The polar nature of water molecules explains most of water's properties. And here are some important properties of water. For one thing, ice or frozen water floats. Now, you might not think this is that important. Maybe it's not quite so important when you're thinking about a glass of water with ice in it. But when you're thinking about a lake or a pond, where the ice is going to form on the top of the lake and the pond, and that allows for life to remain underneath the ice, that's a very, very important property. Water is also a very effective solvent, and we'll be talking about solutions, like a salt solution, for example, where the salt is the solute, and the water, what is the solute is mixed in, is the solvent. And water is very, very effective solvent for many materials. There is also this temperature regulation. So water resists temperature changes. And also, because of this hydrogen bonding, water molecules have both cohesion and adhesion. Water molecules will stick to each other, and they will stick to other materials, for example, like plastic or glass. So let's talk a little bit about how the polar nature of water means that frozen water floats. Okay, so as water freezes, stable hydrogen bonds hold molecules apart. So that's what you see over here, right? Here's solid ice, and you can see these long-lasting hydrogen bonds that are kind of frozen in nature, no pun intended. And this allows This is the property that allows water to be less dense, ice to be less dense than liquid water, and for ice to float. And as I said before, this is important because if ice did not float, then ponds, lakes, and even the oceans would freeze solid, and life in water would not survive if the bodies of water froze solid. Now let's talk a little bit about the polar nature of water, making it possible for water to be an extremely effective solvent. So many liquids can act as a solvent or a dissolving agent to form a mixture called a solution. And water is the most important biological solvent. Very, very important. If you take a glass of water and sprinkle salt or sugar in it and stir it, eventually the crystals of salt or sugar disappear, right? As you create this solution. And in that salt or sugar solution, the water is the solvent, and the sugar or the salt is the solute. The other thing is that the polar nature of water means that water readily absorbs and releases heat. So liquid water can absorb and store large amounts of heat while only changing a few degrees in temperature. So this is important because water can moderate temperatures. So the large amount of water on our planet means that our temperatures are fairly stable. Living things can also use water to regulate temperature. So evaporative cooling is one way that living things can use water to regulate temperature. So that when we sweat, when we're hot, that process of sweating and the water evaporating actually serves to cool us down, regulating our temperature. The polar nature of water also means that water creates surface tension. So this idea of cohesion is the tendency of molecules to stick together. And because of hydrogen bonding, water molecules stick together. They have strong cohesion, and that creates a surface tension. And that surface tension makes it possible for organisms like this wolf spider to be suspended on water due to its surface tension. You've probably seen different types of insects or spiders that can actually stay on the top of the water due to surface tension. Now, the next process we're going to talk about is this idea of pH. And pH is very, very important when we study biological systems. And it's becoming even more important because of climate change. So climate change is resulting in ocean waters becoming more acidic, and that has huge implications for the living things living in the ocean. So understanding pH, how acidic or basic a solution is a very important idea for us in understanding the types of environment that living things do well with. So what impacts do you predict with more acidic conditions in marine ecosystems? We can possibly talk about this a little bit at the end, but it basically can have a huge, huge impact, and not a positive impact. So let's talk a little bit about water and pH. So most of the chemical reactions that maintain life occur in water. We sometimes talk about chemical reactions occurring in an aqueous solution. So an aqueous, aqua is water, right? An aqueous solution is one that contains a substance dissolved in water. And in any aqueous solution, some water molecules, H2O, will break apart into hydrogen ions, H+, and hydroxide ions, OH negative. Now the concentration of hydrogen ions, that H+, in an aqueous solution determines its pH and how acidic it is. So the pH scale goes from 0 to 14. So here's 0 over here. And here's 14 over here. And 7 is right in the middle. So it runs from acidic. So the most acidic is at this end, and the most basic is at this end. And each number in the pH scale represents a 10-fold change in the hydrogen ion concentration. So the pH scale, there is an actual mathematical relationship that is shown for each pH represents a particular hydrogen ion concentration. And as you move from, for example, 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, etc., each pH results in a 10-fold change as you move up and down the pH scale. And this picture also shows you sort of some classic pH of different items. So for example, human blood has a pH of very close to neutral. 7 is neutral. Human blood is pH 7.4. And purified water is 7. If you move in this direction, things get more acidic. So tomatoes have a pH like 4.6. Strawberries are acidic. Lemon, even more acidic. Battery acid, very, very acidic. Moving in the other direction is more basic. So you have things like ammonia that is quite basic. Household bleach, very, very basic. And lye, which you probably don't really know what lye is, but it is extremely basic. So once again, the key is that each number in the pH scale represents a 10-fold change in the hydrogen ion concentration. The pH is a way of indicating the hydrogen ion concentration of a solution. So an acid, by definition, is a chemical that when dissolved in water will release hydrogen ions. And acids have a pH between 0 and 7. A base is a chemical that, when dissolved in water, removes hydrogen ions. And bases are have a pH between 7 and 14. Now, buffers have a very important role in physiology, in biological systems, because living things tend to do best under certain pHs. Now, that pH can be different depending on, for example, where in the body it is, but different chemical reactions occur best under certain pHs. And so buffers can help reduce changes in pH. So cells regulate their pH through the use of buffers. And these are chemicals, found naturally that minimize changes in pH by accepting hydrogen ions. So buffers within your blood, for example, will counteract a drop in pH that occurs whenever you exercise. And once again, blood likes to be in a particular pH range, and so these buffers help to maintain that particular range, because when your blood gets too acidic or too basic, really, really bad things can happen to you physiologically. So how much can a change in pH impact living things? So as carbon dioxide concentrations increase, more is absorbed by oceans and chemical reactions. With seawater, the result being that seawater has a reduced pH. So basically, the higher the carbon dioxide in the environment, the more acidic oceans are. And more acidic will mean lower pH. So low pH conditions impair the ability of many marine organisms to build their skeletons or shells. And so you can have situations, for example, like coral bleaching, where organisms just do not do well with very acidic conditions. So pH changes in the environment can affect the health of ecosystems. And so the concern is that, as CO2 levels continue to rise rapidly, we could have a huge, huge change in our marine ecosystems.